go ahead and talk to you guys about the difference between the preterite and the imperfect. We're going to start with the preterite. Both of these are used to express events and emotions that happened in the past. So we're going to kind of go through when you use both, and then we'll talk. I'll try to talk you through how you can decide if you're looking at a sentence and you're trying to decide whether or not to conjugate your verb to the preterite or the imperfect, or if you're trying to say something to somebody about a past event, whether you would use the preterite or the imperfect to narrate what you're trying to say. So the preterite narrates actions or events in the past that the speaker views as completed or finished, and that's the main piece. Is this? Let me get it a little bit thicker brush. Is the whole completed, finished. So if it's an action that's over and done, if you're talking about something that's over and done with, you're going to put it into the preterite. And unless there's something in your sentence that implies that an action happened repeatedly, typically if it's an action verb, you're going to put it into the preterite. So Victoria y Lucia hablaron por teléfono por 2 horas. So by putting in that 2 hours, we have a delineated time in which it happened, so we know it's over and done with, and so we would use the preterite. It expresses the beginning or end of a past event or action. El zapatero llegó a las 5, la película terminó a las 8 de la noche. So putting these time frames in there, that he arrived at 5, the movie ended at 8 in the evening, we know that for sure it's over and done with. He arrived at 5, it's over and done with. Narrates completed events that occurred in a series. Carlos entró en la farmacia, vio a su exnovia y salió inmediatamente. So again, you'll see, because of all of these together, they're actions, and if there's nothing in there that implies a repetition of an action, actions tend to be put into the preterite tense. So I'll just go ahead and say that. Unless there is something unless there is a word in your sentence that implies repetition of an action, actions almost always are conjugated into the let's put past actions. Okay. It also expresses a change in mental, physical, and emotional conditions, and I'm going to highlight the changes because typically your mental, physical, and emotional condition is going to be put into the imperfect, but if there's a change in your mental, physical, or emotional condition or state, you're going to put it into the preterite. So for example, Alejandra se puso furiosa cuando vio el cuarto en desorden. So here there's a change. She became furious. So that se puso, we would put into the preterite because there was a change. Estuve nerviosa durante la entrevista. And that tells you, again, it's a delineated time. I was nervous during the interview, but if the interview is over, I'm no longer nervous. So if you have things like during a particular time period, or se puso, you're going to use the preterite. Also, it describes weather and scenes as events or within specific time parameters. So if you're, ayer fue un día horrible, llovió y hizo mucho viento. So that ayer lets us know to put all of this weather into the preterite because it happened yesterday and yesterday is over and done with. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the imperfect. The imperfect describes what was happening in the past, usually in relation to another event or at a given time with no reference to the beginning or end of an action. So if there's no the big piece here is that, actually, let me use that there is no reference to the beginning. Oops. No reference to the beginning or end of an action. Okay, Rosa hablaba mientras miraba las compras. So she was talking while she was while she was looking at her purchases. So that word while, that often implies imperfect, because it's like two things happening at once. She was doing something while she was doing something else. She was in the middle of doing both things. It expresses habitual actions or events in the past. So that means something that happened repeatedly. Happened repeatedly. Okay, so Pedro comía en ese restaurante todos los sábados. So he used to eat at that restaurant every Saturday. So that that todos los sábados, that implies repetition because it happened, you know, every Saturday. Ana iba de compras todo el tiempo, all the time. She used to go shopping all the time. So that all the time again implies repetition. So you would put it into the imperfect. Expresses time or age in the past. So if you're telling, if you're giving the time in the past, you're telling what time it is. It was 11 in the evening. That's going to be in the imperfect. Teníamos 6 años en 2000. We were 6 years old in 2000. So if you're giving somebody's age at a particular point in time, because you're that age for a whole year, that implies repetition, or you're giving the time, that's going to be the imperfect. It expresses mental, physical, emotional conditions or states. So unless, you know, when we're talking about a change, if you're noting a change, that's the imperfect. But as a general rule, your emotional condition and state is going to be in the imperfect. Alicia estaba contenta durante el concierto. So she was happy during the concert. Nos sentíamos mal después de comer allí. We felt bad after eating there. Okay. It also, the imperfect sets the scene for other actions and events that are taking place. So, hacía muy mal tiempo y llovía. So it's like when you're giving, you know, if you were telling me what the weather was yesterday, you're going to put it in the preterit. But if you're getting ready to tell me a story, the weather was really bad and it was raining when there was a knock at the door, that's going to be put into the imperfect. Yo leía en mi cuarto y esperaba la llamada. So I was reading in my room and waiting for a call. So if you're in the middle of doing something, that's going to be the imperfect. Also, if you can translate to ing, ing is imperfect. So you can see. So if you look, I was in my room reading and waiting for a call. So if you're trying to say was reading, oops. If you're trying to say was reading, was waiting, then you're going to use ing. You're going to use the imperfect. The preterit and the imperfect are often used together. And so the imperfect describes what you are in the middle of doing or in the progress of doing when another action interrupted you. So conversábamos con el dependiente cuando Lourdes entró en la joyería. So we were in the middle of talking with the sales clerk when Lourdes entered the jewelry store. Las chicas salían de la tienda cuando Jorge las vio. So they were leaving the store when Jorge las vio. So if you're in the middle of doing something, you're going to put that in the middle of doing into the imperfect, and then you're going to put the thing that interrupted what was already taking place into the preterit. So they were already leaving when he saw them. They were already talking when she entered. Okay. So then let's talk about how we can distinguish between the two, and then I'll give you some other examples as well. So analyze the context in which the verb will be used and decide whether the verb describes the way things were or it tells what happened. So again, that's kind of talking about, so era de noche cuando volvieron a casa. It was night, that's how things were, when they arrived home, and that's what happened. Era describes it was nighttime, volvieron tells what happened. In many instances, both aspects produce a grammatical sentence. Your choice will depend on the message you're communicating. Así fue, that's how it happened. Así era, that's how it used to be. Ayer fue un día horrible. Yesterday was a bad day. Era un día horrible. It was a horrible day. Meaning, this is it basically when you say era un día horrible, you're getting ready to give a narration. It's kind of how you would set the tone before you tell a story, whereas here you're just saying yesterday was a horrible day. Oh, I have it on here twice. Okay, so here's some expressions that are frequently but not always associated with the imperfect and the preterit. And these help you because this is typically when we're talking about actions. So remember that the preterit is supposed to be things that were started and ended in the past. And these words right here, anoche, ayer, anteayer, these things right here tend to imply that it's already happened. Like if I say anoche leí un libro, anoche says I did that last night, anteayer, the day before yesterday. So these all imply that I started and finished it in the past. This implies repetition, a menudo, con frecuencia, de vez en cuando, once in a while, often, frequently. So you would use these with action words that are describing things that you did repeatedly. Okay, so I'm going to help you try to figure out when to use the preterite or the imperfect. And we're going to do that by looking at this activity down here. So first off, what you want to do, the questions that I give you to help you determine when to use one or the other is this. Is the verb in the sentence an action verb or a state of being verb? Okay, so let's go through and do these questions. So preterite or imperfect. And this is in English. I arrived late at my office this morning. So the verb that I have in question is arrived. So arrive. Is the verb in the sentence, arrived, is that an action verb or a state of being verb? Well, it's something that you do, so it's an action verb, okay? So then we go on. If the answer is yes, it's an action verb, you have to ask yourself, does it have a definite beginning or end, or is it one that happened repeatedly in the past? So I arrived late at my office this morning. This morning is, we're not saying that he arrives every morning or he used to always arrive late. We're saying this morning, that's one specific event. So if it has a definite beginning and end, then we're going to pick the preterite. So if I were going to translate this sentence, I would use the preterite. I would conjugate this verb into the preterite. Okay. 4 students were already waiting to see me. Okay, so I'm looking at were already waiting. Okay, so were waiting. Would that be a state that they're in, or would that be an action? It's probably more likely a state of being that they're in. And so, you know, was there a change in their state in this sentence? Did their emotions change? No, it's not talking about their emotional state, so there's no change. Was the subject in the sentence in the middle of doing something when he or she was interrupted? No. So if it's a state that they're in, then you're going to go ahead and say that this is the imperfect. Okay, one was Paul Johnson. So the verb that I have in question this time is was. That's also a state of being. Was there a change in Paul's emotional state? No. So states of being tend to be the imperfect, so I'm going to put an I. I grumbled to myself. So grumbling, is that an action or state of being? Well, it's something that you do, so it's an action. And it says, I grumbled to myself because he came to see me before class nearly every day. There's nothing in here, I grumbled to myself, I'm narrating this one event. There's nothing in here that implies that I grumbled every time he came to see me. It was just this one time, so since there's no repetition and it's an action verb, it should be in the preterite. Okay? Because he came to see me before class nearly every day. Came, that's also an action verb, but I have the words in here, nearly every day, which implies repetition. So I would put, even though this happens to be an action verb, I'm going to put it into the imperfect because there's repetition. There was nothing wrong with his ability to learn. Again, that's a state. We're not talking about a change in somebody's emotional state. That just is his state, and states of being they get conjugated into the imperfect tense.